If you can keep your camera on, that would be great.
Not a problem at all.
Super.
Okay. So thanks everyone for coming, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to do this. It's always an excellent experience speaking to people who are interested in the histories of Canada, and this is a very topical history with Vimy, with the 100th anniversary that just passed on April 9th there, which thousands of Canadians, as you know, made the pilgrimage to Vimy Ridge in France. A little bit of background about myself. So I'm a serving officer with the Canadian Grenadier Guards of Montreal. So it's a reserve infantry unit that actually took part as one of the regiments of the Ridge, they call it. So my regiment is very proud of being one of the regiments that fought at Vimy Ridge. And we took a very, very heavy toll of officers and men as the 87th Battalion, which is what we were called then. So this is a near and dear to me. I'm very involved in the histories of the regiments, and I've been very proud to learn about it. And there's a few little distinct things about a regiment that I'll get to later. But I'm going to go with the assumption that we know a little bit about Vimy Ridge, but we don't know exactly tons of it within this group. I myself, you could study this your entire life and not know everything. But I'm going to focus on an overview of what Vimy Ridge was, and why it was important, and then move into the personal stories as well as the monument itself. And then after that, I'm going to go into just the personal touch of what we do here with my regiment in order to memorialize and to commemorate the Battle of Vimy Ridge. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to something called Prezi. And basically what it is it's a PowerPoint type program. It's a little bit more fanciful, I guess, and this is an adapted version from a historian. So if I'm able to switch over now, I'll do that now.
Okay, just go to share and then your desktop.
Perfect. Okay, so to begin, we're going to go with the Battle of Vimy Ridge. Some of the words might be cut off slightly, but I'll get through that point. If there's any major issues, you can let me know, and I'll adjust as best as possible. So as an overview, Vimy Ridge is where that red dot is. So it was basically a hilltop, a plateau portion that was very important to the area in kind of the Nord-Pas-de-Calais area in northern France. So it was, the battle itself was part of a larger battle called the Battle of Arras, which many Canadian soldiers unfortunately lost their lives in or were injured, and many heroes were born out of this as well. But Vimy Ridge was a very specific aspect of this battle, and one that Canadians above all know, and the French know very well. But around the world, it's not nearly known as it is here. There was much larger and much more significantly important battles in France and during World War I that mattered. So the idea was there was an escarpment that was needing to be taken, and basically all of the Allies had tried, and the only ones who managed to even get a foothold were the French with a Moroccan battalion, and they were unable to hold it because of lack of reinforcements. So the French pulled back and pushed back, and the Germans took it again. So as we all know, the Canadians were then brought in, and we ended up taking it. So how Vimy Ridge looked like was this. This is actually one of the maps that illustrated the plan of attack on Vimy Ridge itself, which was 9th of April, 1917. So the Vimy battle was not just this 9th of April, but that's the main attack that we know of. But there was preparations for a month before that, before the battle itself, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But this picture here shows the 4 Canadian divisions that went together. So the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Division. My regiment, the Canadian Grenadier Guards, was actually part of the 4th Division at the time. Now we're part of 2 Div, so 2nd Canadian Division, based out of Quebec. But primarily, before we were 4th Canadian Division. So those 4 boxes on the left-hand side, the green, the gray, the blue, and the orange, show the battle lines and the actual attack objectives. So you can look more into the battles and more into maps if it interests you. They're very detailed. The level of planning at this stage in World War I was incredible. Without the technology that we have, the map makers did incredible work, and partially the staff work and partially the work that was done beforehand is what created the level of success in Vimy Ridge. So this was the area of the British offensive, and the Canadian front is in the red. So that whole red line moving basically from northeast down, that's the front. So it's a very, very large area to work with, and it's crisscrossed with trenches and machine gun emplacements and wires and everything you could think of. This was a heavily, heavily defended area. I'm going to skip over this video quickly. In the end, I'll give you a link to it, but it basically overviews the entire thing I'm going to be speaking about with a few more pictures in. But I'd rather just have the time to talk about these things, and then after, if we have questions, we can go to it, and we have a bit more time, we can play the video after. So Vimy Ridge itself, like I said, was an area that had been fought over for quite a while. But the Battle of Vimy Ridge basically took part between the Canadians and the Germans. All right, so it was the Canadians in those 4 divisions that basically had to go up against the Germans, who were a very, very strong, very well organized, very well equipped military. But this was in 1917 when things had already gone on for so long. Trench warfare has drug into these kids. They're 17, 18, 19, 20 years old children that are there fighting, and they've been fighting for years in the mud. So this has been not just at the beginning of a war when we think of France now with beautiful background and green trees and everything like that. This was mud and slog and wet and just absolutely brutal. It happened in April during the showers. So this is when you think of that in that sense, you're thinking of people up to their knees in mud, and you're thinking of rats in the trenches, and you're thinking of people who have been already fighting often for 2 years, 3 years, etc. Canadians, 1916, 1917 coming in. But the important thing to note is that while it's not just the Canadians and the Germans that are actually participating in the battle, the British were instrumental in providing, not to mention the equipment and the supplies and the support, but also a lot of the firepower that was helping to back it up. So this is a picture of those trenches that when I spoke about what they were living in. This is France, and it looks nothing like the French and the French areas of the France that you know today. But these were gents that were living in the ground in the mud with lice infesting every single part of their clothing, and with the worst foods imaginable. Every World War I letter, or the vast majority at least, still displays a sense of stoicism, though. And we're going to get to a couple letters at the end here, but it's incredible to think about the level of calmness and, like I said, stoicism that these gentlemen displayed in the face of such adversity and seeing their friends killed or wounded, and not seeing their families, their children, their brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers for years, and having no breaks for weeks, and knowing that tomorrow you could hit by artillery and it's over. These guys sent letters that would talk to their families just about, oh, it rained today, or today was awfully cold, or we had some great bully beef today. It was very different than the letters that may be sent home today, or the Facebook messages or the emails. This was incredible to think about in the absolute most difficult circumstances. These guys still had such a sense of either optimism or at least realism about it. And whether that's to say it was because of the times or because of the soldiers, it's not for me to say that, but it's incredible. And I think that often undermines, in a sense, how bad the war actually was. When kids go to the War Museum and they read about these incidents, they read the letters home from soldiers, they seem so calm that a lot of youth think, oh, well, it couldn't have been that bad. But when they think of Afghanistan, they think it's absolutely terrible. And Afghanistan could be terrible. But here it was brutal, just the brutalest of wars. And the letters don't really reflect that, which is really interesting. So a famous quote is the following: "In any national story, there are moments and places, sometimes far from home, which in retrospect can be seen as fixed points about which the course of history turns. moments which distinguish that nation forever. Those who seek the foundations of Canada's distinction would do well to begin here at Vimy. So often we talk about Vimy Ridge as the birth of the nation, and I spoke about this a bit before we started the actual presentation. But you'd be hard pressed to find someone nowadays, at least in the more senior generations, that could think of a more defining singular moment that best reflects Canada coming into its own. Right? We had a 100-year anniversary where this monument is not just a monument to Vimy, but it's a monument to Canada. And that's a huge, huge deal. The fact that Canada, this small dominion, this small, basically, segment of the larger British picture, the British Empire, now suddenly is stepping up. You know, it's coming out from under the shadow of England, of Great Britain, and it's on its own, and it's doing extremely well. And we should be proud of that, and we are proud of that. Now, there's a lot of discussion nowadays of whether this mythos that's been built around Vimy Ridge is warranted, whether it's doing a disservice to the battle itself, and whether the battle is really that significant, both strategically and historically, to be that notion of the birth of Canada. Whether it was or it isn't, it doesn't matter in my opinion. The fact is, it's part of our national story. It's part of who we are now. And I think that should be really recognized. And I think it's important to have a sense of understanding of what that means. 100 years ago, Canada came into its own. So Vimy Ridge itself was not just this battle, like I said, on April 9th, 1917. There was quite a bit before that. So a lot of tactics were introduced, and a lot of specifics about the war were new, and the Canadians brought a lot to the table, and this war was kind of a trial of a lot of these new tactics. And it was a lot of planning and preparation before we actually went in. So Vimy Ridge, and this was a slightly older quote, but until this day 90 years ago, Vimy Ridge had been impregnable, a lesson learned at terrible cost to the armies of France and Britain. For the Allies, this ridge had become a symbol of futility and despair. So to think about Vimy Ridge, you have to think of it as this basically death zone. The British, the French, they sent thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers to take this ridge, which was deemed important to the strategic value of it being able to oversee for kilometers and miles, depending on which you use, the entire area. And the French and the British had sent men to their deaths, waves upon wave, trying to get this. And it was seen that it was not possible, but it was so important, in their opinion, that they needed to get this. But imagine knowing that you're going to be moving up into this ridge, and it wasn't a secret. Soldiers spoke to each other. They knew that this ridge had been impossible to get. And some of the most trained, some of the most experienced soldiers who have fought in multiple battlegrounds were unable to take it. Imagine being a Canadian soldier, 18, 19 years old, 22 years old, whatever, having to take this ridge, knowing that full well that it's very likely that you could be killed or injured, and you may not even get the ridge in general. So the Canadians...
What did our folks do that made it successful?
So I'm going to get into that portion in a little bit here. So the idea is that what we did that was so successful was, one, we had, I know a lot of this seems ridiculous, and militaries necessarily don't have this kind of strange notion of pluck, right? It's supposed to be just based on our training experience. But the Canadian soldiers are very specific soldiers. There's something about the way we went into it, right? Beyond that, though, we hadn't been fighting since 1914, right? So the French had been exhausted. The French were fighting in their own grounds for 3 years straight. Some of their best men are killed, and they are drained. They're fighting on their own land, and they're just not sure. The British have been fighting almost the same amount of time. The Canadians arrived somewhat fresh, with a lot of good soldiers with experience from the Somme, but weren't exactly drained out yet. So that was one portion. Beyond that, there was a lot of new tactics that were used as well, such as like the creeping barrage. So the idea was that previously you'd have trench warfare, right? And the trenches would just, one would run at the other one. They go into no man's land, which was the area you could be targeted by everything. They run across and they try and attack the other trench. And the other trench would do the same thing, and then they do that for a bit, and then they stop. In this sense, the barrages of the artillery, which are the big guns basically, what they would do is they would separate them in lines. So a separate amount of distance between each of them, moving closer and closer, closer to the front. What would happen is the artillery strikes would move forward, creeping boom, 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 in order to basically soften the enemy force before we actually moved in there, as well as providing a protective cover and a way of suppressing the enemy. This was huge. This was a major deal. There was also new concepts of communication. There was new ways of getting lines built. There was a lot, quite a lot done. So a lot of this built into it. Okay? So the Canadians, as it says here, arrived from the Somme, which is, again, one of the worst battles in World War I, one of the most difficult and very important battle Canadians took part in. And they got to Vimy in October 1916. So October to April, right? There's still quite a while during that time. The Canadian Army was probing the Germans' front lines, testing their security, and gathering intelligence. An important thing for any war, including today, is intelligence gathering. If you move into something blindly, the likelihood of you being injured, the likelihood of your mission failing is much more elevated, as opposed to if you gather intelligence and you're able to change your tactics based on needing. And the Germans' front lines were static at this point. They were holding it, right? So a defensive position has a lot of benefit in the fact that it takes a lot more of attackers to take out a defensive position. But you're static in the fact that the people attacking you can probe it. They can find out where your weakness is. They can find out where they are. They can find out where your supplies are coming from. They can do all of these things and kind of adjust their plans around it. And you can't really do as much when you're in the defense. So in March 1st, 1917, the Canadians launched their largest raid against the Germans. So this was a full month before the Battle of Vimy Ridge as we know it. This did not do a lot of damage to the Germans because the Germans had basically made Vimy Ridge, after they captured it, into a defensive fortress. It had lines upon lines of trenches. They had basically reinforced trenches. They had barbed wire. They had gun emplacements providing oversight. They had some of the newest technologies in the area. They had great weapons set up there. They were tired and they were hurt and they were not at their 100%, but they were very much dug in. It was like the equivalent of attacking a castle in medieval times with just a horde of people and a few siege weapons. You have to think of it like a castle. It was extremely difficult. So as it says here, the Germans had a very complex system of tunnels. So the tunnels in the First World War were basically not just those simple trenches that we thought. You know, people think of the trench, the officer blows the whistle and everyone goes over the top. No, there were trenches that had lines of communication that moved all the way back. There were runner trenches, specifically for runners to pass information up and down, ones for ammunition to move up. There were tunnels underneath so they couldn't be hit by artillery or be seen by the World War I planes, which were present here. It was very, very complex. And the longer you have there, the longer you have to defend it, the more complex you can make it and the more difficult it is for the attackers to actually get in there. So beyond the trenches themselves, they had heavy artillery and they had soldiers who had been fighting for 3 years straight. So these Germans had experience. So it was a very difficult battle. So here we can see basically how the trenches were dug out. It's not the greatest photo, it's a World War I photo, but basically you can see the gents there digging out their trenches. And these would be the first kind of stage 1 trenches, which is basically just hole in the ground, a foxhole almost, in order to stop whenever artillery happens. You can hide in it so that ideally the shrapnel doesn't hit you. But eventually the trenches would have overhanging metal. They would have mat boards inside of them. They would have lines for the phones to be able to talk to each other. It was very, very intense after a lot of time there, rather. So this one's, let me see if I can move that up a bit. Okay, it might not be the best view, but I'll read it out here. So the preparations of battle. To counter the security of the Germans, the Canadian soldiers were trained in exact replicas of the German trenches. So like I said, by getting that intelligence gathering, they were able to make replicas of the German trenches. About 80 to 90% of what they saw, they could recreate. So they were told different possible scenarios and trained for each one. Not only that, a group of engineers in the war were given some men to dig certain tunnels in the no man's land and set up explosives there. More tunnels were set up with dugouts filled with supplies the Canadian soldiers might need. The intelligence they had gathered about the enemy's defenses would prove much useful. This was the first planned battle in the war. So while there was planning involved in previous battles like the Somme and other such big ones, this one here was a recreation of something. Basically, they created an entire knowledge of what this was before they even got there. Canadian soldiers knew what they would be moving into. One of the biggest things that Canadians did differently too is our general recommended that each soldier or each group of soldiers had a map and an understanding, not just of what to do, run over run over into no man's land and shoot at the enemy, but understanding of kind of a why and kind of a how this was going to happen. And this is something that Canadians still do to this day. Is a lot of people say a Canadian infantryman, the difference between us and other militaries is that our corporal or our private, our junior ranks are able to act much more at a higher rank than other groups are because we teach them to have autonomy. Our corporals and our young troops are able to act on their own with the knowledge we give them because we trust them with that knowledge, and we know that the more that they have, the more that they understand, the better they can adapt to the plan that the commander needs them to do. This was really born almost in Vimy Ridge, as well as not just the notion of Canada, but this notion of how we fight our battles. So we had groups that were specifically made to blow up enemy trenches, blow up enemy tunnels in no man's land, to set up basically preemptive strikes in some cases. And we knew where trenches were. So even when you hit the ground, you knew, 1 kilometer, 250 meters, 500 meters this way, there's going to be a German trench. It's going to be this long, and there's likely this many German soldiers. This is a very, very big deal. It cannot be underestimated. So there's a picture of some of the boys going over and attacking a German trench. You can see the Germans in the line directly in front of them and artillery hitting behind it. In this picture, some of the Germans are holding up their hands in surrender. The Germans surrendered once we took it. We, not only 1 or 2 at a time, a lot of the letters of the day said that the Germans came down to 150, 200 people at a time, these Germans, and they were only guarded by 2 or 3 dudes with bayonets. The Germans were just so tired after these battles. They imagine, fighting for 3 years straight, having no relief. You're on the defensive line. You can't be rotated as much out. And knowing that finally, you may have lost the battle, but you're going to live. You're 19, 20 years old. You're not fighting this for an ideological reason, most of these kids. They're fighting it because their country needed their call, right? It's not like today where we have a fully professional army where you sign up, you sign on the dotted line, and you know what you're going to do. A lot of these kids were farmers. Everyone knows the famous Christmas truce, where the Germans and the British got together on Christmas and played soccer, and they exchanged gifts and things like that. These were children. These were guys younger than me. I'm 31 now, and these were 18, 19-year-olds, right? So you can understand why surrender didn't seem like the bad option after being attacked by a forceful shock troop of these Canadians who seemed to know exactly where their trenches were somehow, and being barraged for an entire week. So the attack itself, before 10 days of their attack, the Canadians did a barrage of heavy artillery. So like I mentioned, they softened them up there. It was to weaken the defenses and to catch the German surprise of their actual attack. So the idea was that by attacking consistently at random times and just never letting up with the artillery, the Germans wouldn't know when the actual attack happened. In previous battles in World War I, what would happen is you would hear artillery strikes come, and then that's the key, that's what's going to happen, people are going to start running over. It was like a Pavlovian response almost, artillery strike, battle, break, artillery strike, battle, break. In this, it was just boom, 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 never knowing when it's going to end, and then suddenly there's thousands of Canadians coming in over the hill, coming to attack, and you didn't expect it because you just thought it was another artillery barrage. So when you ask that question about things that were different, this is one of those differences as well. So as I mentioned, there was early aircraft as well, World War I era aircraft that were doing surveillance, and some of our early fighter craft were there. So Germans dubbed this the week of suffering. This was a week of just them getting destroyed by our artillery and our forces. So we reached the main day of April 9th, 1917 at approximately 5:30 a.m. Predominantly in military history and even today, we attack at dawn. And usually you try and situate yourself in a position where the light is on your side, not the defender's side. So you have the light to your back generally. So the 4 Canadian divisions, the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th, attacked together, 5:30 a.m. on April 9th. By the same day's afternoon, so about 2 p.m., 2:30 p.m., depends on when the reports came in, the Canadians had defeated every German troop but one. So troop meaning a larger group, not an individual man. Now that one group, or one area that hadn't been taken was something called a portion of Hill 145, known as the Pimple. So it was basically up on the ridge, there was another taller hill, like the hill on the hill kind of off the side, and the Pimple was the tip of that. And it was just an extra, 100 meters, 200 meters, I'm not sure the exact, I'll look at it in a second here, but it was the last one to be taken. And it was one that my regiment, the 87th Battalion, or my regiment that perpetuates the 87th Battalion, had to attack and took many, many, many casualties on. So it was, to say, the most difficult and the hardest to reach. It was the most heavily defended. Despite the fact that the rest went down in the day, the Pimple took a lot longer. So on the morning of the 10th of April, the Canadians attacked it, and they kept it for 2 days, meaning the Germans had to retreat almost 3 kilometers. That's a massive pushback. So 3 kilometers in World War I, sometimes the trenches were as far as 75 meters away, 50 meters away. You could see the stubble on another soldier's face in World War I. It's easy to say that and say, oh, it's just it's an interesting thought. But imagine knowing that there's a dude on the other side of this 50, 75, 100 meters that you can see, that that he will shoot you if he sees you, and you will shoot him if you see him, and you don't know anything about each other. You just know that that's what you're going to be doing. So the fact that they went back 3 kilometers is a fairly big deal. It's a fairly large portion, and we then took this impregnable fortress. It was basically like taking a castle from the enemy, a castle that could oversee the entire land around it, and now you could use it for resupply, for a defensive point, for a point to pivot your forces off of. So that was a big deal, and the fact that we took it and eventually took the Pimple is a huge testament to Canadian ability. So the Canadians had won the Battle of Vimy Ridge by this point. And there's some of our gents on the back of a vehicle after the victory. There's actually a colorized picture of this as well, and it's a very nice one if you ever get a chance to see it. I just couldn't find a version that would work for this PowerPoint. But after that, generally what happens is you take the defensive position and you stay there and you get relief in place. So someone else will take over from you. Someone fresh from the rear lines will hold the position, and if you were in battle, you tend to go back into a village and you regroup, right? And you deal with your wounded, and you coalesce, and you do what you can to get back into the fight again, because the war was not over yet. So in this case, no fewer than 4 Canadians were awarded the Victoria Cross for conspicuous bravery during the battle. So it can easily be said that every soldier in the field demonstrated conspicuous bravery. Such was the verve of the Canadian attack. So the Victoria Cross, for those of you who don't know, is the highest award that you can get as a Canadian military member, as a British military member actually, but we still have it in the Canadian system. It is a massive accomplishment. It is the generally awarded posthumously, so after someone has died, given that it's that grave of a deal. It's equivalent to the Medal of Honor of the U.S. And so 4 in 1 battle over the course of 36 hours is a very big deal. But when it talks about the fact that every soldier could be seen as having bravery, I 100% think this is the most important portion of it. The Victoria Cross is an unbelievable recognition of doing something incredible. But the bravery it takes to know that you're going to be moving into this area, that you're going to be fighting against something that has killed thousands of men, and not knowing your part beyond the fact that you are a rifleman and you will move forward and you will shoot that bad guy when you see him. I can't think of many people today who would be able to do that. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, and the bravery involved in that is incredible. So the Victoria Cross itself was the highest military award gifted to 4 people in this battle, basically. Private William Milne, who crawled to a machine gun, an enemy machine gun. He bombed the crew, basically used one of his hand bombs, a grenade type situation, and captured the gun. Lance Sergeant Ellis Sifton, who killed the crew members and captured a machine gun as well. Captain Thane McDowell, who tricked an enemy troop to surrender by making them believe he had a great army behind him, when in reality he only had 2 soldiers.
Oh my.
Yeah, pretty incredible. And that's happened many times in World War II as well, where people basically use deception, and they caused massive amounts of surrenders because, again, when you see this artillery barrage happening and you have thousands and thousands of soldiers coming up over this hill, and someone says, you know what, we're here to take you over, and you just want to go to sleep. You just want to, you're done fighting. You're beyond exhausted. The likelihood of this happening is much more. And Private John Patterson, who jumped from hole to hole, basically from different pockmarks from artillery strikes and from different trenches to take out a machine gun crew from 30 meters away. So imagine running up to a machine gun, you know, that can fire thousands of rounds at you, and you're willingly moving into the face of danger and being injured in the process. It's unbelievable bravery. So to show the scope of how huge this was, the equipment is extremely necessary to understand. So the Canadians carried 42,609 tons of ammunition and 2,465 tons of daily rations. That is an incredible amount of equipment to be used on this. They also carried 245 heavy guns, 4 12-inch howitzers, which are very big cannons basically, and Royal Navy Division's naval guns and other heavy artillery. All of the big guns, quote unquote, were here for this battle. We shot thousands and thousands of rounds and fired hundreds of thousands and thousands of rounds of artillery during this battle. The gun crews were excellent, and they had to be, because without that creeping barrage, without that cover fire, without the softening up of the Germans, the infantrymen, the guys on the ground, would be killed. So they knew that their job was important. So now we get to the effect. So Vimy Ridge itself, that's an overview, right? It's not the most in-depth overview because we can make, there's classes, there's PhD level writings on just one specific combat element of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. There's theses, there's books written on this. There's dozens of books written on Vimy Ridge and what the battle is itself. But as an overview, that was it. Okay, that's what happened. We basically moved in, we took what no one else could take, and we took many casualties in doing so. But the effect is really the long-lasting reason why Vimy Ridge is so remembered in Canada. There's schools named after Vimy Ridge. There's parks. In Montreal, we just rededicated a park after Vimy Ridge. In almost every town in Canada, you can find something about Vimy Ridge. You can find, a plaque. You can find a family who was affected by it, who had someone that was there in their lineage. You can find a gazetting article. You can find something about Vimy Ridge. This is ingrained in who we are. So this was the first battle that was fought only by the Canadian soldiers. It wasn't us mixed with another group. It wasn't one Canadian division with the British unit. It was Canadians acting as Canadians under mostly control of Canadians. It was a symbol not only of that, but also of hope and sacrifice. Hope in the fact that Vimy Ridge was deemed to be impossible. There was thousands of soldiers who died there. There was many military planners who believed it could never be taken. And they believed that this kind of was a representation of the larger battle, right? You've been fighting for 3 years here, and it doesn't look like the Germans are losing yet, right? So this hill, taking this hill, this impenetrable, this impossible hill, was now seen as something, wow, maybe we can take this. Maybe we can go further. Maybe the war is at a turning point now. Maybe we can do this. Not to mention a symbol of hope for Canada as a burgeoning nation. This is us not just saying, we're always going to be kind of under the thumb of British influence, a member of, the British Empire and always that. This was us being like, okay, I think it's time now that we walk on our own. It's time that we can push our own future, maintain our own destiny. The hope that, you know, all the hard work that we've done can be seen, be represented, and now Canada can be Canada. But it's also one of sacrifice. So Vimy Ridge represents the sacrifice of thousands and thousands of Canadians and hundreds of thousands of British, German, and French soldiers. And it should represent that. It's not just the Vimy Ridge Memorial and the Vimy Ridge Monument do represent Canada. It's Canada on French area in Canadian land. But Vimy wasn't just the loss of Canadian soldiers. It was the loss of German soldiers and French soldiers and British soldiers, young men who gave up their lives, gave up their families, basically, to fight at something that they really didn't understand the larger portion of. It was a game of chess between superpowers at the time, fought by farmers and shopkeepers and fathers and brothers and sons. And the sacrifice is incredible for that. And this notion of Vimy, where we have many monuments all over Canada, we have monuments and we have plaques all over the world for Canadian soldiers, but Vimy really is our monument, in my opinion. It is something that represents the larger scope of sacrifice of the Canadian soldier and of Canada and what they've done. The families back home had to give up in order to, you know, to support the birth of our country and continue doing good things around the world. So people in Canada thought of themselves as proud Canadians and no longer a part of Britain. The battle was a mark of our identity as Canadians. And outside of Canada, it was the event that made everyone look at us with respect and as an independent nation. So it wasn't just, you know, the British, when we were combined with them, oh, the British took the hill and there's Canadians involved in it. They don't really say that. They would say, you know, the British took the hill and it was made up of one Canadian division and the British won over. But in this case, it was, oh, who ended up taking that Vimy Ridge? The Canadians did. Oh, the Canadians, yeah, just the Canadians. It was Brigadier General A. Ross says, in those few minutes, I witnessed the birth of a nation. This is the memorial itself. I've had the pleasure to go there last year. It was an incredible, sobering experience. It was only, they basically closed it down just for us, just for the Canadian contingent of the Nijmegen team. Basically, Nijmegen is a yearly event that happens in the Netherlands where we march 40-ish kilometers a day for 4 days straight with 25 pounds of equipment. And it's about 1 million spectators and 50,000 marchers, 5,000 are military. But the big key of that is that the Canadian contingent goes to Vimy Ridge. And we get a chance to do a parade there to show our respect. So I went there on the 99th anniversary, and it was an unbelievably incredible experience. If you ever get a chance to go, I believe, did you go recently, Margaret?
Yes, we just went for the 100th anniversary.
Right. So it's something that really needs to be seen in person to understand just the scope of it and the size of it. And the trenches still exist there. You can go and you can see the crisscrossing trenches and the pock marks and the holes, and you can see the you know, how close these enemies were to each other. And you can see the living standards that they could have been in if it was muddy and rainy and they were this far from home. And the monument sits at the very top of that. And it's unbelievably sobering and beautiful, and nothing I can say would be anything but trite in explaining this. I really do recommend you get a chance to see it.
When you walk through the trenches, you can feel it. You can
feel
exactly the spirits.
Yeah, it's definitely, as I said, sobering experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the effect on the war and what Vimy Ridge meant was that this was a much-needed victory for the Allies. Hundreds of thousands of men had died attempting the same battle. And for the first time in 2.5 years, it would seem that war might end and peace would reign. This is playing into that hope aspect I spoke about briefly. The victory of Vimy Ridge was a memory of hope and inspiration. It was hope that things could turn around in a year, in 6 months, in 2 years. I could be back home with my wife. I could see my kids that I haven't seen in 2 or 3 years. You know, one of my friends may not die tomorrow. It could mean that this is the end of the war, right? For the guys on the ground, and for the generals and for the politicians, it could be, this is it. You know, this is near the end of the war. We have achieved our strategic aims. this could be it, right? But it's more so for the little guy, the big guy, I'd say, in Vimy in this case. The significance of this battle is still debated today, but most people agree that it was not the most significant battle of World War I. But the strategic significance is one thing, but the morale significance is another thing. You can never underestimate the aspect of morale on your forces. Being able to fight in a belief you have and continuing to fight, knowing that there may be an end goal, is a huge, huge deal for a soldier on the ground. So the cost of the battle. Over the course of the battle, there was 100,000 Canadian soldiers. Out of those, 3,598 men lost their lives, and 7,004, it varies between 6,800 to 7,100, were wounded, many cases badly. Loss of legs, loss of arms, eyes. That's 10,000 men out of 100,000 that were just basically ruined. And the hospitals that we have nowadays were nothing like they were back then. Some of these men lived lives of pain for the remainder of their lives, and this isn't counting the shock of things that we call operational stress injuries nowadays, that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. There were thousands more of these men that came back and just were never the same. Fighting in massive wars like this and massive battles like this can really affect your mental well-being. So yes, we lost thousands of lives, and which is an incredible amount of men. Towns were decimated, and we lost more that were wounded. But we also had the mental aspect that can't be counted necessarily here, because the mental well-being and the healthcare wasn't there during World War I. It was called shell shock, right? Or you were seen as being just a traitor or weak, oftentimes, and some of these men would come home and just never be the same, right? And it would ruin families. The cost of the battle is more than just the physical, it's the mental aspect, and I think that's something that needs to be stated at this point. So if you are interested in checking this out a little bit more and knowing a little bit more about it, but here's a bibliography that's been taken, basically, mostly from the War Museum and Veteran Affairs Canada, and they basically have a lot of the information that goes through it. You can Google Vimy Ridge and you can come up with thousands and thousands of things, from elementary school PowerPoints for a class about, I read one recently about someone from Elbow, Saskatchewan, a school there that had a soldier that was killed in Vimy Ridge, and they basically, the school put together a discussion about who this man was, and found out about his family, and found out about him, and basically commemorated their hero, their local hero, in their own way. And you can find many things like that, but as an overview of an understanding of what Vimy Ridge was in the larger picture, these are some of the best resources that you can go through. And I think it's a good starting portion. So I can always give the link to Margaret if anyone else wants a copy of this Prezi, and I know it's being filmed, so you have that as well. But that's some of the main links that were used here.
Great. I will absolutely send it out if you send it to me. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing the desktop now, and I'm going to go into the next portion, which is the PowerPoint. Before I move into that, are there any questions or anything that need to be discussed before I go into the PowerPoint? We'll just talk a little bit about the memorial and the remembrance aspect.
Rebecca, did you have a question?
I guess what hit me the most was that the two guys, the fellow that got the Victoria Cross, and he pretended that there was a whole troop behind him. To experience exhaustion, stress, anxiety, fear 24/7 for years, and to be that smart to think about that, imagine what it took for him to muscle up that kind of courage. That story just really hit me. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, definitely. I think the same thing. As a military member, I've been taking part in training. I'm an infantry officer, so my job is to generally lead groups of 40 people into combat situations at the lower level as a platoon commander, and now more as a planner of those operations, and leading a larger group of 3 groups of those 40 people, basically. But we've used in training deception techniques where we have, a small group moves off to the side and pretends to be a larger group. But it's one thing to do that in training with fake bullets and to know that you're going to go home after a week, and one very different thing, as you said there, about doing it after years and knowing that if they call you out on your bluff, you will die, and the men you're with will die. It's a huge deal to do that, and I 100% agree with you that acts like that are pure bravery. And when we talk about heroes, I think that word is bandied about a lot, and we talk everyone's a hero, but that man, by doing so, saved many, many lives, not just Canadian lives either. He saved German lives by capturing that group and taking them, not hostage, but taking them as prisoners. And I keep coming back to this, but these were boys. These were young men. And I think that that can't be overstated. The German soldiers were not evil people, right? And the Canadian soldiers were us, and they were just like me. They were just like your sons. They were just like your brothers. I think that's extremely important. But yeah, thanks for the point there.
Thank you.
So I'm going to move into the PowerPoint. It's just a few slides. It's not nothing huge necessarily, but it's a few little things that I wanted to bring up about some personal stories and a little bit more about the memory, about these people on the ground, because it's easy to talk about, the 3,600 soldiers that were killed, but who were the men that fought there? So there's two small stories here. So this gentleman here, and everyone can see that PowerPoint, is Private Ron McKinnon. So it's a picture of him in his battle dress, which was standard woolen uniform that they wore, buttoned up and looking very proud, with his puttees, which were the wrappings, and his boots, and that's kind of what he had for his picture. So he served with the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, or the PPCLI, who still exists today. So a lot of the regiments that fought during World War I, given the time and how the military changes, have been either folded into different regiments, have been perpetuated by other regiments, or have just ceased to exist in certain cases. The Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry still exists. Excuse me. They're one of the 3 regular force battalions, regiments rather, and they predominantly exist out of Edmonton and Shiloh. So Shiloh, Manitoba, Edmonton, Alberta, and they are a light infantry organization that is extremely proud of their service, and they are one of the best units in the Canadian Armed Forces. They are almost one of the first ones into battle situations. They took part in huge wars. In Korea, they won acclaim for their actions. So he served with a very proud unit and one that saw some of the bulk of the fight. He was born in 1893 in Toronto, and he signed up in 1951. So he was approximately 21 years old, and he was in France by May 1916. So, like I said, he wasn't fighting since 1914, but he showed up in May 1916. So there's a number of letters that came down from Private McKinnon. There was about 7 of them. But when I talked about the Stoicism, I really wanted to highlight a few pieces of these to talk about just the things they spoke about to their families, right? Were not things about, seeing all the brutalities of war or complaining about everything. They basically talked about a lot of the mundane aspects as well, and just kind of an overview of it. Now, there's a few reasons for this. One of them could be the fact that they wanted to spare their families from the brutalities of it, right, of the actual terrible aspects of war. Number 2 was that their letters could be censored for what they wrote. They knew what they couldn't write about often, and if they wrote something, it wouldn't be allowed to go through. And number 3, they don't always know the larger picture of things. They have a little small aspect. As a rifleman, you know this, right? You don't know necessarily what the largest scale will be, so you focus on the things that affect you day to day. And things that affect soldiers in 2017, just like 1917, are the weather, your food, when you're going to get a break, and who's shooting at you. All right, so it's very similar in the situations here, but the letters they write are incredibly stoic, and I think it's incredible. So on June 26, Ronald wrote, "I was wounded in Sanctuary Wood, the other side of the city of the dead," they called it, and just how terrible the battle was there. When I came out of the trenches, I only had a tunic, a pair of boots and socks, and half a pair of pants. They had to cut my pants away from the wound. So basically, he took a wound in the leg, and they had to cut off his pants to apply the dressings, and they just said, okay, you're good to go, get out of here, and that's what he wrote about. So his family back home hears about this, a couple weeks later, and says, wow, okay, this is incredible, what's happening to him. So in Christmas 1916 in the trenches, he wrote, Christmas Eve was pretty stiff, sentry go up to the hips in mud. We had a truce on Christmas Day, and our German friends were quite friendly. They came over to see us, and we traded bully beef for cigars. Christmas was très bon, which means very good. So très bon means très bon in French, and you'll see a lot of the Anglophone Canadians joke about the French aspect of it. But this is one of those truces, right? So despite the fact that gets wounded, and the fact that he's seen his friends and neighbors and civilians going through some of the worst aspects you could possibly go through in life, he had a truce with these guys, and he says the German friends were quite friendly. That wouldn't happen nowadays necessarily. You wouldn't go in Afghanistan, most soldiers anyway, wouldn't have a truce with the Taliban and say, they seem like great guys. We traded, some of our food for some of their food. It wasn't the same. It wasn't the same type of war. It wasn't the same type of battle. In January 1917, he spoke about the weather. Everything was frozen, water froze in our bottles. Stew and tea was cold by the time it reached us in the front line. But then this is war, and I always try to smile when things are a little rough. And nowadays, if we lose Wi-Fi overseas, we get riots. So it's a whole different situation. But this builds into that idea, and just like Rebecca mentioned there, is you've been fighting for years. You've been fighting for months in some of the worst conditions possible, and yet being able to do such bravery and do something with at least a smile, a wry smile on your face is unbelievable. So he wrote these letters, and they seem, pretty nice and standard. And his last letter was dated April 6th. It's a bit longer, but I think it's important because it's his full letter. He says, just a few lines to let you know I am okay. This is Good Friday, so I had a feed of eggs, as I will not be in a place where I can get them on Sunday. We're having very good weather here now, beautiful spring days with lots of sunshine, which is gradually drying up most of the mud. It will never all dry up, as there will always be mud in this country. Well, by the time you get this, you will have read all about it, so will know more about it than me, as I will only know what goes on in my own little sector. I'm a rifle grenadier, and I'm in the first wave. We've got a good bunch of boys to go over with, and good artillery support, so we are bound to get our objective all right. I understand we are going up against the Prussian Guards. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. The Canadians have met them before, and they remember it. So even in this situation, he talks about the weather, and he mentions the good parts. He says, it's beautiful spring days and lots of sunshine, but he talks about how the mud will never dry up. And I feel like that's almost alluding to the fact that, it's just so terrible. The situation's bad, and all he's known in France, right? This is a Canadian boy from Toronto who all he knows of France is mud and death and blood and cold soup. And he says, by the time you'll get this letter, dated April 6th, you'll know more than me. It's about Vimy Ridge. He's just a rifle grenadier, so he's a guy in the front lines who's going to be in the first wave up that hill. But I've got a good bunch of guys with me, and we've got good overhead support, that artillery fire, so we're going to do okay. And he talks about the Prussian Guards, the Germans they're going to meet, and how they're supposed to be very experienced and very good. But he says they've met us, they know us, and they know that what we're made of. They know what a Canadian soldier is. So Private Ronald McKinnon was killed in that battle. So being one of the first men up the hill, in one of the first lines, he was killed during the Battle of Vimy Ridge, and he lies buried in the Bois Carré British Cemetery, Telus, on the lower slopes of Vimy Ridge. So this 23-year-old boy from Toronto that wrote letters about cold soup and sunshine left behind a wife, Lily, and his two children, Archie, who was 5, and Annie, who was 3, who found out about his death about a week after. So you can see Archie there, dressed in a similar uniform and proud of his father and proud of other Canadians. And this really hit home for me when I was reading through letters. Was the soldiers themselves died, sure, but it wasn't as if they just ceased to exist. They leave behind families. They leave behind young widows in their early 20s. They leave behind children who will never know their father. They will leave behind parents and relatives who will think about them for 100 years. And that's why the story kind of resonated with me, and how important it was to see the letters. The next one here is Private George Chisholm, and this is a difference. So when we talked about the Stoicism there and thinking, you know, things are going to be okay, and how the battle, I think it's going to be okay. We have artillery support. We have good boys going over with me. We'll be fine. George Chisholm, private from the 78th Battalion, he went over as well. And he wrote this on April 6th, 2017, correction, 1917. And he wrote a letter, passed it off to the male guys, basically the runners that bring it back. And he says, please return the enclosed ring, it's a carbuncle, and my Gillette razor to my next of kin, George R. Chisholm. And he writes his letter of Saskatoon. So he knew things probably weren't going to be the best. He knew what the levels of this battle were, and he says, please return my ring and my Gillette razor to my next of kin. That's a big one for me, knowing that you're going to be willingly go into a battle here. That you know hundreds of thousands of men have died trying to take this, and you have the courage and the foresight to do such a thing like this. And when you think of the items, a ring and a Gillette razor, and those are the important items that they had at the time, that says a lot. And this is really a personal letter, as opposed to one that is just, you know, talking about the generics. So here we can see that Private Chisholm was previously reported missing, and he was now reported killed in action. He was wounded on the morning of April 9th, 1917, during the Vimy Ridge engagements, and died that evening. So Private Chisholm was one of the other soldiers that was killed on the day of Vimy Ridge on the 9th. So the Vimy Ridge Memorial is one of the things that best commemorates and remembers the soldiers like these two in the entire world. So everyone has seen the picture of Vimy Ridge Memorial. Everyone knows what it looks like. It's famous. It's in our Canadian being at this point. So how it came about is very different. So the sense of national pride and confidence sparked by Vimy was not just in Vimy itself, but in the 20s and 30s and 40s became a huge deal. Specifically in the 20s, there was a sense of national pride and confidence that was sparked by Vimy. And there was a construction of a massive limestone memorial atop Hill 145, which was that big hill we talked about, on Vimy Ridge. It has the names of the 11,285 Canadians who died in France in the First World War with no known grave. That's a huge amount. You're basically looking at 11,000 soldiers who have no known grave. And the amounts, if we talk about how many Canadians were killed in Afghanistan, you know, less than 200, which is 200 too many. You think of 11,285 who have no grave, not to mention the ones that do. The scope of it is incredible, and it's impossible to get your mind around how huge that is. It's easy to understand one person, it's easy to understand 10 people, but understanding thousands and thousands is such a grave number that no one can really think about it at that scale, right? So this memorial represents that. The monument isn't on French land necessarily. The French basically bestowed upon us this area and made it Canadian. The land is Canadian, given to us by France, and it's drawn visitors for almost an entire century. So ever since it's been open, Canadians who are in the area will go there, and they will pay their respects and see the land itself. If you look in the picture, and hopefully you can see it, the memorial is in the center, and if you look up to the right-hand side, you can see all those pockmarks. That's where the battles actually happened. Each of those strikes is basically an artillery hole. So each of those is almost one round, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of those, and the trenches kind of crisscrossing throughout it. And that's a very, very big deal to think, you know, how much actually went into this area, how much effort and how much firepower. So not just Canadians go there, but visitors who are interested in military history, and Germans who go there to see where this battle happened and to learn about their history as well. That's something that's seen a resurgence in the last few years, is Germans coming to better come to grips with their histories in war. After World War II, it's very difficult for Germans to understand and how to not justify, but kind of come to grips with their country in war after the Nazi occupation of France, and now they're able to do it a little bit more as one of our allies and understanding it. And I think it's a good thing that they're able to better understand what happens, because these were young men just like ours. So the Vimy Ridge Memorial is basically another picture right there. A beautiful memorial designed by Walter Seymour Allard, who basically won the ability to design it after a contest was held in the 1920s. It was a contest held for, I believe, 8 different memorials that would be placed in different battlefields and different places in the world. And for Vimy Ridge, which is considered one of the capstone and one of the most important ones, Walter Seymour Allard's design was being chosen, and I think it's phenomenal, and I think that it's one of the most beautiful art pieces I've ever seen. The site itself is still crisscrossed with trench lines, and it's pockmarked. So those pockmarks we showed just a second ago is one small picture of it. A lot of the trenches they have there you can't necessarily walk on, and they've been overgrown. So this beautiful manicured lawn, it's kind of grown into the trenches, and it's just small little grooves throughout it. But there's also ones that they've made that look exactly like they have, or have fixed them up to be like they were, and they're basically rock-lined, shallow trenches that run through it. You can see the sites like built into where we can see through where they saw the other trenches, and you can see the distance. Beyond that, you can go into the tunnels. Vimy Ridge has tunnels where you can go underground, and you can actually see where our soldiers lived. And you can see etchings on the wall where they wrote, you know, John Philbin was here April 9th, 1917, Royal Montreal Regiment, etc. Do all these things. It's incredible. And the War Museum in Ottawa has a number of pictures and pieces from this as well. And the Royal Montreal Regiment in Montreal also did an exhibit called Regiments on the Ridge, and they have a phenomenal experience, and a lot of people that go there that host their events in the Royal Montreal Regiment, specifically about World War I and World War II. So the actual monument itself has 2 large 30-meter pillars, basically. These pylons are called. And they're supposed to represent and reflect a defensive bastion. So when we talked about the fact that this hill was almost like a fortress, that's what it was. And these are supposed to kind of adhere to that idea. So they represent this defensive bastion, this impenetrable thing. And when you get there, you can see the size and the scope of it. And it really is powerful and huge. And you can only imagine what it would be like coming up to this hill and seeing that. And it kind of gives that awe level of it. The 2 pylons themselves, one has the Canadian representation, and one has the fleur-de-lis from France. And the idea is that it's to represent our 2 countries working together. So France and Canada both paid immeasurably rather in this war, and this was kind of a way of representing our ties together, because we are inexorably bound. World War I, World War II, our Quebec background, even today as an ally, we are bound forever, and this was a representation of that. There's 20 allegorical figures over it. So a lot of times when you see pictures of Vimy Ridge, you see just the 2 pillars and you see one specific piece of it, but there's 20 different figures that represent things, truth and honor, sacrifice, all of these pieces in there, and they're in different poses all through it. And you can look onto the Veterans Affairs website, and you can see the memorial, and you can go through and actually go through all the allegorical figures. And it's really interesting. It's far too much to cover in just this one brief, but it's unbelievable. So out of those 2, though, the ones that I think, actually I'll bring up another one briefly as well, is number 1 is the breaking of the sword. so there's one part of the monument, one figure where he's breaking a sword. And that is supposed to represent the fact that this war, we all know the term is the war to end all wars, right? This was supposed to be, this was such a bloodbath. This war was the loss of so many communities and so many families and this battle specifically representing Canada was the end. You know, the breaking of the sword is this war we fought. We paid for blood for peace. We paid with blood for peace, rather, and this is it. We're done. We're breaking the sword. As well, there's another one on there that has a torch. It's basically someone holding a torch up, and I'm sure you all recognize the symbolism in this, and the "To you with failing hands we throw" from John McCrae, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae's Remembrance Day famous poem in Flanders Fields. And that is another one where it has this sacrifice and throwing it up there for the hope and the inspiration and representing that as well. And most importantly, not most importantly, but most well known is Canada bereft, which is the symbol of kind of Mother Canada mourning for war dead. And it's the famous picture of that everyone sees of a cloaked figure looking down and saddened. Not necessarily weeping, just done, destroyed, like you just lost your son, like you lost your daughter. It's the most, in my belief, it was the most moving of the figures itself, but the entire monument is something that needs to be seen. And I do recommend you do check out those figures and understand it. Canadians all know the symbol of Vimy Ridge Memorial, but they don't know what the symbols represent on it, and I think that's a very big deal. So here's a larger picture of it, but it's incredible. And that is Canada bereft. So looking over where the Canadians assaulted and basically just saddened beyond all and grief and despair in one allegorical figure. So closer to home, this is the last portion of this brief, and I thank you for sticking with me on this. I know it's a wide-ranging topic, and I really appreciate it. So this here is something that's near and dear to me. This is one of the most important photos that I have in my life. This is the 87th Battalion Canadian Grenadier Guards mourning their dead after Vimy Ridge. And if you look directly in the middle, there is a memorial, a makeshift memorial that was made out of the duck boards, basically the planks in the trenches, and ammo crates. And it basically was a memorial to their dead. And later on, they put all of the, on it, there's little markers, little metal plates that show the names of all the dead. This is my regiment, historically, mourning their dead. And it was one of the first memorials on Vimy Ridge. So these were impromptu ones that came up from each of the battalions that were up there in different regiments, would create their own little ones. And this is one of the first ones that were all replaced by the Vimy Ridge Memorial later on. So while this is an important aspect, perhaps more importantly is that we have this now in my regiment. So this memorial we kept, and it is in my regiment, which I'll be headed to directly after this speech, or this talk rather. Every morning we come in when we come to work, and every time when we leave, we get to see this. So it's the exact same memorial as from the photo previously. It shows the killed in action. And you can see the names slightly on there, written in, with the dates, who they were, their service number. And below it in the glass there, it's hard to see, but it has rocks from the location. It has gas masks from one of the battles we were at in World War I. And it has weapon parts that were found and dug up from Vimy Ridge that potentially belong to us. You see that every day. So, yeah, every day we see it. So it's a very visceral and important reminder of our history and of our regiment. So while Canadians know about Vimy Ridge and they understand the importance of it, for regiments that fought at Vimy Ridge, it's much more embedded into us. This is something that I know about because I see it. I can touch the wood that was on Vimy, and I can see the stains from you know, the people putting it together. I can see the names of people that were killed. We have memorials all over our regiment from all the wars, but World War I specifically, in the officers' mess, when we go downstairs, there's a plaque that shows the World War I officers that were killed, and we come to attention, we salute it, and it shows someone like Yonkels, who was killed. He was wounded first and then was killed at the end. And we know these people. We know their histories. We know their family members. We've met people who are descendants of World War I veterans. So this is very, very important to us. So I think this is a really neat piece of history, Canadian history, as well as military history that exists in our building in Montreal. So if you're ever in the area, it's a great thing to stop by. It's just there. It's something for everyone to see. Beyond that, it's not just the memorials. So this is members of my regiment, the Canadian Grenadier Guards, and these are the junior ranks. These are corporals, master corporals, and privates, which in my regiment we call guardsmen. Going up on Remembrance Day, or the Sunday of Remembrance Day, and they go up and they pay respects to our war dead. So we do generally one specific one, John Francis Young, who won the Victoria Cross for being a stretcher bearer in a different battle, but nonetheless, he represents kind of the overview. And then we try and change it up and go to different graves each year to show respect for our war dead as well. So this is something that isn't just talked about in our regiment, it's something that we continuously do. And it's important to ingrain this into the junior soldiers, not just as understanding of where they come from and what it means to be part of a regiment, but as Canadians as well. So as reservists, some of these soldiers, you know, may stay in for a year, 2 years, they may go and do other things, but they'll have a better sense of what built this country, right? And regardless of not if people agree with the actions of World War I, World War II, Afghanistan, so on and so forth, it has had an incredible impact on our country and who we are today. So understanding that and understanding the sacrifices of young men, especially in World War I and World War II, who went through and basically gave their lives for a larger cause, often just because their country asked them to, shouldn't be overlooked. And it's something that the officers don't organize this in my regiment. It's not something that's forced down. This is a junior ranks initiative, and the junior ranks proudly go every year. And you can see them lining up there to give their respect. They're incredible. And I think that most regiments across Canada do the same thing. And we're very proud of our histories. So right now we're working on an initiative with the Commonwealth Grave Commission and a few others to clean up the gravestones in Montreal area. So it's something that I'm spearheading right now, and in the beginning process of it, of making sure that all of the gravestones and markers across the Montreal area, and there's thousands and thousands, some of them are in grave disrepair. So we're going to be linking up with student groups, and we're going to be linking up with the Legion and linking up with our cadet organizations and other regiments, and doing cleaning work on basically ones that have been neglected for years for whatever reason, from Laval to Ganawake to Montreal to Westmount, for wherever, as something that we can do to give back, because it's incredibly important to us. So I'm going to leave this last slide here. This is my regiment, and I'm on the left there with the beard. And this is my regiment at Vimy Ridge Memorial in last July. This was during the Nijmegen March. This was our stopover there. And this is our regiment representing the regiment itself at Vimy Ridge Memorial. It's something I'm very proud of. It's one of the most important pictures in my life with some of the best men I've ever served with in this group, and some of the best men and women I've ever served or had the pleasure to meet in my regiment. The officers, the senior NCOs, and the junior ranks are phenomenal people, and I'm very proud to be a part of the regiment, and I would do my job for free if I could. They're excellent people, and I think that's the reason why our regiment is so good, and the reason why I'm so proud to be part of it is because of things like Vimy Ridge and the sacrifices that people did there, and knowing that I can be a small part of this history. And maybe in 100 years, they will talk about, you know, the time that we went to Vimy Ridge and showed our respects to those soldiers, so that their memory from 1917 won't be forgotten because we perpetuate it. And that's, I think, one of the most important things about this entire aspect of being a military member. So that's it. That's my presentation and my little spiel about my experiences. If there's any questions or concerns or comments or anything of the sort about the battle, about my experiences, about anything, feel free to ask, and I'm here for as long as you need me.
Thank you so much, Captain Anhorn. My husband is here, Grant, and we're in Winnipeg, and we're cycling up to Vimy Ridge with Wounded Warriors.
Amazing.
And,
yeah.
And we really don't know much about it. I have the book, but we're busy in tax season right now. I haven't had a chance to read it, but oh, your stories, you're so good at animating. I just feel like I was there for an hour. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the service you do for our country. It's really, really important. And my dad was in World War II as a bombardier in 44-45 at RCAF, and you know, we really appreciate all the work that you do every day, and it's important for our country.
I appreciate it, and thank you very much for coming in and listening to it. You know, it's not just the military members that perpetuate these things. That's why we try and speak to as many people from different aspects of life, whether they be people of family members, people are doing amazing things like you guys are with Wounded Warriors, children, new immigrants, anyone we can to talk about these histories. It's the only way it's going to continue, and it's the only way that sacrifices like this are going to be remembered. So really appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll pass it on.
Yeah. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anything to add, Sue? We've got a standing ovation from there. So we want to really thank you so much, Captain Corey Anhorn. You've given us some great information. It's going to be recorded, so we're going to be sharing it with many people far and wide.
Okay.
Now you're speaking on behalf of the Memory Project, which is a great organization that shares information on various topics, right? So you can often get a speaker on various topics. And we're just really thankful to have you here today. So thank you for your service, and this is a great picture to really bring home, especially when you had to walk, what, 240 kilometers during
it was 171 kilometers over 4 days in 30-ish degree weather with about 25 pounds of equipment. It's a great event, though. It's and in this uniform. It was one of the best things I've ever done. It was a very, very proud moment. Yeah.
And you did it with this crew?
This is my team, yeah. So it was 10 members of the Canadian Grenadier Guards and 1 medic, Ian DeLong, Warrant Officer Ian DeLong in the top right there. And it's a very proud moment. Canada sends about 100 people per year, and there's 5,000 military members and 45,000 civilians. But yes, the Memory Project, and I'm glad you brought that up just as a last thing, is one of the best organizations in Canada that there is for getting military history to people in regular day-to-day life. So I've been lucky enough to be able to speak on behalf, or for them rather, for a number of events, and they're an excellent resource. So if you check with the Memory Project on Facebook or online, they have everything from testimonials from World War II veterans to resources to learn about different battles or different aspects of history. And they do things like go into schools or liaison with organizations, and they're really phenomenal. And I'm glad they do this association between myself, who would love an audience, you know, and people like you. So thank you.
And I will connect with Maya and make sure that information gets on the flyer that we sent out with the recording.
Perfect.
So thank you so much again, and we're going to stop the recording. Rebecca, Sue, thank you for coming, and we'll send you the after session